Our next guest is Monika Löve. Actually, she is Estonian. She graduated Estonian art school. She followed her studies in Eindhoven, in Holland, sorry. And she continued her studies in London in multimedia and design. And now she is working in Italy, in Torino, in Karan's studio. So open your minds and enjoy Monika Löve.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's kind of nice to be back after 10 years. Before going into the project, I am today really much focused about the project. I would like to talk a little bit about my background and what has led me to where I am now, the way that we work in the office, because I think it's, in some ways, it's as important as what's the outcome. So as mentioned, I am a graduate from Design Academy here. I always been struggling with the definition of interior architect, and when people ask me, what is my role or what is it I do, I never really know how to answer. So I say I'm something between a designer, an interaction designer, a social designer, perhaps an architect or a writer. And in some ways, all these kind of professionalities come together in my work. I did study in Eindhoven for social design. It was quite interesting years. It was the years when Design Academy went through a kind of a critical change. Everything from what it was changed during the time when I was there. Starting from 120 students, we ended up finishing just about 40 of us. And starting from with one department, we ended up being in 3 departments. Throughout the year, we explored a lot. And we hated our teachers to come and tell us 10 more models. Throughout the practice now, I would say, please, 10 more models. It's the way to kind of experiment and be free of everything that's overwhelming you. Whether it's books or whether it's everything all your colleagues are doing around you, it's the way of thinking about things. It's not that I do it every day in the office. Rather, I tend to write. We often do works in other programs, but I miss of having this kind of touch of physicality in a way. After the Design Academy years, I was in London for 5 years. I started in a small architectural practice, which over the years became a technology startup. And it was interesting because throughout the years, my work starting as an architect, as an interior architect, changed into something which is more about the interaction with people or interaction through the computer with people. And this has taught me a lot about the way that the society works or the way that we think about spaces or the way what we do and who we are. And I think that's quite critical in a way that we work now in Torino. The office in Torino, it's called Carlotti Associati. It's based on the research of the professor Carlo Ratti, who is leading the MIT Sensible City Lab. So the office is actually focusing a lot about how do you take the research and do something around it. So we are kind of the architectural design output of some of the research. But at the same time, whenever we start a project, we never just start about drawing or modeling something. We always start with a discussion or a debate about what is it that we are doing and why. I think that's very important also, the way that we discuss the projects within our office, but also with the clients. It's starting with something which is more about the context or the vision or putting the problematics down. What is it and why are we doing it before we're going into the so-called nitty-gritty of the design. Having said that, I really like the part of the nitty-gritty of design because I think in details is where you find the most. It's almost like the details are your enemies in a way because they make you change your design. It's not only the client, it's about self-criticism, it's about working in a collaborative mode. So today I thought I will talk about very different type of projects, because we always work around different types of scale. So from master planning, from vision, into experimental installations. So I selected some of the works I've been working on over the 1.5 years. So they're all kind of experiments, so bear with me. But they're all following a route of questioning what is the role of the environment, and how can we use the space that we already have designed into something else? Or can we rethink that we are designing them now? So I think the best way to kind of introduce this vision or this context that I'm talking about is about something that I came across about a year ago. It's something that American Express is doing. It's called the Blue Work Program. And it's a strategic report on how to make better use of existing spaces while creating an environment that is more in tune with how people work today. Of course, they are all about the real estate values, cutting the costs, but I think it's very important to start to think about it. About 30 million American people work home now. And this actually assumed that in 2020 could be 1 of every 3rd people. So the Blue Work Program, what it does is actually thinking of the productivity of workers and how it can save money. And they have calculated, of course, as an American Express, as a multinational company, that it could save them 10 to 15 million annually simply per real estate costs. So these policies have a huge impact on what are the spaces now. The one company is able to get rid of something like 250,000 square meters simply by changing the way that they work. So this has led me to kind of think about what is the adaptability of the spaces. How do we use these underutilized spaces? There's a lot of square meters. Is there a way that rather than just demolishing them, we can actually design them in a way that you automatically can accommodate change? It's not about fixed design in this way. Then it's more about framework and developing something that is flexible for users and for needs. You ask, of course, can you give us an example? One of the examples that I found is, can you get to the next slide, is a parking garage in Miami. It's called 111 Lincoln Road by Herzog and de Meuron. And what's really interesting about the way that this building has been designed is that it takes the standard of parking and creates it into a public space. Rather than having a standard 3 meters of height for parking carriage, it actually hosts a variety of functions. As you can see, all the levels are naturally lit, which allows any function basically to happen. And that's what they also do. They host weddings or yoga classes. When the parking is empty, they also turn it into kind of a living room. And this works really well in this kind of a Miami Beach style of climate, where it's always nice to be outside and you do enjoy it. But I think it's very important also as a space or as a structure that actually accommodates that. So how does this as an example project involve or integrate into the work that we do every day? This is a slide about of one of the largest scales we've been doing. It's a city vision or digital vision for a city in Colombia. It's called Medellin. And what Medellin is special for is that it's isolated from different cities, but as such, it is sort of an urban laboratory. And it really sits in a kind of a green spring area, because literally all year round, you can be outside, you can host. It's never too hot, never too cold. There is a huge problems, of course, as any of the South American cities. There is issues of violence, of reclaiming neighborhoods. there is an issue of us being so far from other cities. How do you integrate the industries back into the more global overview? So one thing we have been talking about is that could we create an environment in Medellin, pulling in all those different universities or international companies and make it into a creative kind of a cluster or a district that would accommodate the change that I was talking through that parking carriage before. So there's a really short video of a master planning we've been doing. It's all about creating this kind of, or maybe blurring the boundary between what is a building and what is inside, what is outside, what function happens where. I'll just play the video where, as a background and I'll keep talking over it. So the idea is kind of to create a network of plans, of parks, of public spaces, of pedestrian-oriented streets, of neighborhoods that can be both for living, for working, for interacting. It's never really just one function. It's an overlay of everything. Of course, you could ask, but then what will happen to this city? Does it become kind of a district isolated in itself, or can it function in a much larger scale? Of course, we don't have a solution yet. I mean, it's never been built, but something to think about. I think it could be an interesting as an urban laboratory within a city. The other interesting thing to think about is kind of new facilities and new education, training, whether some of the things that are already there can be shared. We all know about the sharing economy, whether it's for taxis, cars, Airbnb. Can we share it kind of in another level? Can we already design buildings that are built for sharing? Or maybe it would never work. I think this is something that in Medellin could be very interesting. It could create a district that is more efficient and it's connected. And at the same time, it would allow people to live in a kind of a 3D mixed development rather than driving every day back to the same places. These are a few of the images that I will later on comment as well, what has been decisions and why we would design a space like that. The whole idea would be to somehow integrate people back into the environment, rather than putting them into a building one by one. We'll think about, what if we just open the doors and the activities wouldn't change? This is the overview of Medellin. It's literally in kind of surrounded by green park network. It is the city center. However, it's very close to the Berghe size. So it is important to kind of keep in mind that whatever you're designing, you cannot block off any other parts of the city, because that would create more problems between different neighborhoods. So the first idea is to take a kind of the main street and think of it as a green spring or green environment. How can we design something where people, cars, different functions are not separated, but rather they change over time? So what you're looking at is something we pose as a public street, as the main street, that could one day become of cars into smart driving ways for bikes. The next image is more about the new type of working environment. What if it just, instead of going from one place to another, you would open doors and you would go and work outside, straight in your courtyard? What kind of equipment we would need to do that? And this is something that I think is the most interesting about the work I've been involved in lately is creating this interface between the city, the functions, and the people. Of course, it could be imagined something very simple, which could be kind of like 3D matrix of light or something that creates a public interface. we've been playing on the idea that what if the city is full of these public interfaces? Our work always involves a lot of sketching or kind of dialing into what ifs, kind of future scenarios. So this is something we've been discussing again for Miami. It's called a cool cloud. There's something that contains 5 different functions. I will explain them later. But the idea is to give people something that directly responds to them. So if you are in a public space, it's not so far to imagine that something already knows that you are there. What kind of environment does it create around you? Does it put us more together? Does it create us as a community, or does it actually separate us? So in this case, it's a picture of a lighting canopy, and that is sensing people when they're underneath. And of course, there is an option that if you wanted to play with it, you could play it, turning it into kind of your mood or mood of the city, or it could actually do some other things. Perhaps this is the kind of you as the pixel, as the public display. This is a rather, let's say, simple idea for the type of work we do, because we always try to complicate things. I don't know whether it's in our benefit or not, but it always challenges us to rethink of the way that we design things now. And this cool light canopy, as we call them, actually is not so simple, because each of the elements that we call them as hanging elements could contain several functions. They could be either water or air or electricity or data going into together and all responding to your actions around it. And our question was that would it actually, what would it do to you as a person when you moved around it? Would it change your behavior? Would you be comfortable, or would it be too much, kind of a way to think about it? I mean, this led to another research done now by MIT in the Sensible Lab about the way that we use energy in our buildings. In some ways, all these projects are interrelated. They come from a topic and they lead to another topic. And then they kind of have a snowball effect that it later on becomes 3 projects. And none of them are necessarily the ways to kind of bring them to the product market, but more about challenging of the ways that we think about space now. The other argument for this type of, I would say, working is exactly as written on by the research in MIT, is the way that we use energy in our buildings. So the way that we heat or the way that we cool, it's always general systems. Spaces are being both heated or cooled, whether we are in there or not. Spaces are being cooled either for 1 person or 100 person. What is it that we can do to make this overall cost perhaps come down or make it more personal to us? This is, I don't know, perhaps you have seen it. It's a project that was presented last year in Biennale in Venice. It's about the local warming. Can we heat up our buildings simply by heating it to people and not heating the room as such? Can we make it more personal to do with what is it that you're feeling, not what is according to the norms? This kind of amount of energy we are using to heating either empty offices or empty homes or partially occupied buildings, it really addresses the, let's say, the sustainable way of thinking. Can we synchronize the human presence with this climate control, and what would then be the outcome of it? In this case, it's a very simple system, although it doesn't look like it. It's ultraviolet, responsive infrared heating elements that relate or react to motion. So when a person moves under it, the climate changes according to it. It's sort of thinking about a kind of a cloud of light or warm or cooling that follows you through the space, and then it creates more cooler space for you or more warmer space for you. And by doing this, it will efficiently save the energy and definitely overstep orders of magnitude. So when you think about kind of the way that we have heated our buildings from now, from grotto or from fire pits, or the way that we built up the kind of central heating from Victorian times, I mean, they never really go beyond than what they are. Perhaps there is a way to go beyond and think about it, the kind of heating as a new method, or for that matter, cooling as a new method. This was how the installation looked like in Venice. It was boxes of heating controls that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Sometimes people wanted to throw balls at it to make them work, and sometimes got overheated on their heads. We went on from this and tried to think about it more about the cooling system, especially for climates such as in Arabic Peninsula or even in Singapore, because they are extremely hot and humid, and most of the year people wouldn't even want to go outside and they would rather sit in an air-conditioned space. And one of the things we did is something we call the Cloudcast. It's a similar system. It's using motion tracking, but it provides people with a local direct cooling. It's been used as a system as such for a century, but not in the way that it could be integrated into public buildings. It's based on generic cloud of mist, as in the pictures below, from energy and water. So you take the water and you pressurize it through it into creating this kind of a nice effect of cooling. And by doing this, you create a comfort zone around this person. I will show a very quick video how it worked in an installation. We're still working on it, but it's something as a first step, let's say so. It's a fresh air. It is made of kind of tubes. It's well designed. It was presented in Dubai in beginning of the year for the local developers, because in Dubai it's very specific that they never would like to go for a project that has already been built somewhere else. So you always have to go with experimentation. It was quite interesting because the way that this air created misty zones, and it was well received. However, there was huge problems of mist gathering on the ground and making it slippery. So if you go back, you can actually see my colleague walking over it. We had to put white dots over it, saying that it's a danger zone, which of course was not our intention. But it's a kind of it's a group of studies we are working on at the moment. We're calling it location-based temperature control infrastructure. It's a long name, but to summarize it very briefly, it's about extending your body. It's about the climate responding to you, not you responding to the climate. And exploring how can we bring this type of thinking into public spaces. We don't yet have any answer, but I think it's kind of questions that keep coming up and could lead towards some other experimentations. I would like to stop here now because I'm not sure how much I've overwhelmed you. And if there are any questions or any comments or clarifications needed, I would rather go that way.
Any questions about these really interesting projects?
I'll try to figure out. You showed this city area in Italy. Is that an existing area, or is it raised down and built anew?
Are you talking about Medellin?
Yeah.
Yes, it's an existing area. It's what they call the local high street. It is a main street about 2 kilometers long. It is surrounded by mainly universities and research labs. However, they are not connected, and that was one of the interesting things about the project, is to bring those local institutes together and make them work together for their environment. So in some ways that made us kind of enablers or hostesses to kind of make them talk in different terms. It was quite interesting because I think at the end of the project we had about around 20 partners in workshops trying to get everyone's opinion, and opinions of course don't correlate in that sense. But Medellin as such, it's not the first one. I mean, the city as such is being divided into several districts that are being developed now through different, let's say, mainly European research labs. So I think for them, what is very important is to come up with a coherent vision. What is it that they want to do? Actually, I didn't mention it, but I think it was in 2013, or maybe even last year, that they were named as the world's most innovative city. And it was done by the Wall Street Journal. And this is not because they think beyond boundaries, but it's more about that they realize their problems, and they know that rather than tackling them one by one, they need a larger framework to do that. So things are in progress now, and there is ups and downs in the project, but I believe it will go ahead.
In relation to this city, is it a reuse thing as well? Is there existing buildings that are being reused, or is it all?
Actually, there isn't that much of rebuild at all. We're reusing everything. We are adding mainly infrastructure and providing something like a communal spaces in public areas for people to talk or people to share things for building or for education. So we call them living labs, where rather than everyone creating everything from scratch, you would actually go and ask your neighbor to hire a tool, or ask someone else who had experience with something else to kind of go and share those. So our idea was not so much about maybe building in that urban sense, but more about creating this extra layer of infrastructure on it.
Thank you.
I think there is one in that back.
Please.
I have a question about the personal climate
Yes.
system. If you move about in a rather cold environment, then you get the heating from above or wherever. But how, have you been thinking about the relation to all things you touch, which will probably be cold, and vice versa? If you have a cold cooling system following you, the environment, the walls, furniture, door, everything will still be warm. And this relation, what have you been thinking about that?
Yes, that's actually our next step. We have been working now more towards the kind of idea that of being under a canopy, letting people providing them a way to go out and being there. We have been working a little bit with furniture that is responsive as well, exactly for temperature. I believe I'm still looking for the sponsors as always, but I believe there might be something in Paris shown later this year. There are some works done by other companies as well. The main problem of systems like that is they're never really that invisible, that once you plug something in, they always need a very large infrastructure under them or above them. And I think that's one of the critical points of this design, that even though you're creating a very personal thing, and the infrastructure that you're adding to existing building is massive. So it needs a lot of, it has a lot of cost, but also I believe it has a lot of maintenance involved in it. But as I was saying, they're all experimentations towards something, and I'm sure that even in a few years' time, they would still keep coming back to our tables.
Great. Any other doubts and questions? Thank you, Monika. Thank you.